Coming up on from the 27th to the 29th of March at the Nova Cinema in Melbourne is the first in Melbourne Africa Film Festival, Australia. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the co-director of the Africa Film Festival Australia, Mumbi Hinga. Mumbi, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you for having me here.
Pleasure. Great to talk to you. Tell me, what were the decisions about moving the festival? I mean, it's probably still on in Sydney, to Melbourne.
Well, the background of the festival, as you probably already know, was we started in Sydney.
Mm.
And the reason Safia and I started in Sydney is because, charity begins at home. And because we're based in Sydney or around Sydney, that's where we started. But that's not to mean that the demand for a festival like Africa Film Festival is only in Sydney. The interesting thing is that there is actually no other Pan-African film festival in Australia. So we do have a South Africa Film Festival, but that only tells stories from one country, which is South Africa. And so there is this gap in Australia whereby there are some stories which are not being told via a festival. And there's this report which is called the Screen Diversity Industry Network Report, which happened for the second time in 2025. And what that report showed is there's still a significant underrepresentation of African stories in Australia. And this is not just in actors. So what they did is they did their survey in basically everyone in the film industry, from actors to people who are in the background, hairstylists. And so it's a really comprehensive report which showed that gap. And ever since we started, there's been requests from around Australia to expand the film festival there. And we just haven't had the capacity to go elsewhere. And what we know is when it comes to the African population, it's quite significant in places like Melbourne as well. So it was only natural that as we start to pick up, we start thinking of where else can we continue to do the work that we're doing in Sydney. And we were quite happy that Melbourne was the next for us.
Excellent to hear all that. That's really great news. And I'm intrigued. You've mentioned the South African films and so on, which I'm familiar with, but how big an industry around the rest of Africa is the film industry? Are there many films being produced so that you can select from them?
There are lots of films, Peter. For example, for our program last year, we screened, I think it was 8 feature films, but we watched 100 plus
Ah,
films. And that is not all the films that are being produced from Africa. It was based from Safia and I selecting a few films, a few out of the many that we could have chosen from. And unlike what many festivals would do, where you put out a call for submission, we can't do that because then we'll have hundreds, if not thousands, of films to choose from. And with our limited resources, it's actually very difficult to filter through all that. So there is a lot more stories that unfortunately we are not able to bring to our audiences. And yeah, so to answer your questions, there are many, many, many films. I think we are still yet to touch the tip of the iceberg.
uh-huh. Oh, look, that's great to hear, and it's good to hear that there's so many films available and produced so that we can see them in Australia. Excellent to hear all that. So tell me, Mumbi, how did you work with Sophia Amadou, who is your co-director for this Africa Film Festival, in selecting the films for Melbourne for this year?
Selecting the films for Melbourne, we actually went the easier route. So we kind of adapted from what we've already screened in Sydney. But how we do it from the Sydney perspective is we try and look around films that are going to be as representative as possible. It's really difficult to represent 54 countries in one festival that runs over 3 or 4 days. And it's not an easy decision, but what we try and do is represent each part of Africa. So we think of North Africa, East, West, Central, South. So we try and pick a film from those areas and also try to be as diverse as possible. So it's not going to be all documentaries or all focused on one theme. And so it ends up being a really, really difficult process trying to really uh, meet all those points that we try and um, say will determine how the festival looks like. And so borrowing from Sydney, trying to represent a few parts of Africa, different themes, is the same kind of idea that we've adapted into Melbourne. So all the films that are screening in Melbourne this year have been screened in Sydney, except one, This Jungle Life, which unfortunately we couldn't screen in Sydney. It's about Sudan, a very important story, and Sudanese refugees. But we had a few films about Sudan to choose from. However, for this particular film, it's actually done by an Australian who is based in Melbourne. So it made perfect sense to include it in our Melbourne screening. And we're very fortunate that we're going to have a Q&A after the screening in Melbourne with the filmmaker.
Oh, excellent to hear that. Yes, I want to go through each of the films that are screening just to get your comments about them. But that's great. This Jungo Life, yes, that's closing the festival with the filmmaker there as well. So let's start with the opening film, The Fisherman from Ghana.
Okay, so The Fisherman from Ghana is actually a very interesting film, very popular with the crowds. In Sydney, we actually sold out and they were asking, can you expand? And unfortunately, we cannot expand the cinema. Now, The Fisherman is a light-hearted, humorous story, and it goes through various generations. It's actually quite interesting. There's a talking fish in the film. So we wanted something that is light to open with because we've got some heavy themes that are reflected across our program. And so The Fisherman is an interesting award-winning crowd puller. And we thought it was quite a good idea to have it as our opening night. But it's also a story that's been well written. It's the first Ghanaian film to feature at Venice Film Festival. So it's quite a significant film for Ghana. We also like to amplify stories that are made by people who are marginalized within a marginalized commission, so a community. So it's a female producer, so a female-led film. And yeah, so that's our opening night, The Fisherman.
Sounds like a bit of fun. It sounds like a really interesting
Yes,
film. So very good. Now, next is a film from Kenya called Nawi about an arranged marriage.
yes. Now we centers on this young girl who is being forced into child marriage. And that's something that's still a huge global issue. And sometimes people think of child marriages as something historical, but it's still affecting millions of girls, not just in Africa, but in quite a number of places around the world. And child marriage, it cuts short education, it cuts short autonomy, safety, and future opportunities for these young girls. And what makes Nawi powerful is that it tells this story through this girl's perspective, through Nawi's perspective. And in this story, we can see her intelligence, we can see her dreams, we can see her resistance, and it becomes really deeply personal. And audiences have responded really well to that. It's also been one of our crowd favorites because it balances urgency with hope as well. It doesn't reduce her to just a victim, it shows her strength as well. And it does spark conversation about girls' rights globally and through beautiful storytelling.
Okay, again, sounds really good. Okay, next, I notice a French Algerian film, a political drama. I always love political dramas, called